So this is like the strangest build ever, but we'll see.
Welcome back, guys. So as you can already tell, this is going to be a totally different type of video than my normal. This is a build kind of like the Mad Hatter and Down the Rabbit Hole that I consider a passion project. So I am a complete sucker when it comes to challenges. So if someone challenges me to attempt to build something, well, eventually I have to try it. Right now I'm just cutting parts for this build, so that's kind of the boring part. So let me tell you a little bit about it. So a good friend of mine showed me a photo of one of Caleb Woodard's power carved pieces and challenged me to make something in my own style similar to that. So of course I had to accept the challenge, but then I realized I have never power carved anything except for a little piece of scrap wood for about 5 minutes. And there was nothing about this build that was normal, nothing that I had done before, so I had to troubleshoot and figure things out as I went. But like I teach you guys, never let fear hold you back from doing something that you want to do. So with that being said, let's jump into the video here. So to this point, I have glued up 4 panels that I'm going to be using as my walls. They're 2 inches thick because with this power carving, I wanted to get really deep to show a lot of dimension and depth. So what you're seeing me do here is I'm making a new table saw sled for these panels. These panels are huge, so none of my existing table saw sleds would fit this. This is a very basic sled, but that's all that I need. I needed a sled that was long enough to support these long, heavy pieces. It only took me about 20 minutes to build, and this would allow me to get nice square cuts on my ends, as well as being able to cut my drawer faces. You'll see that here in a minute.
At this point, I had my panels glued up, and someone got a little carried away with the glue, so I'm gonna have to scrape some of that off. And these are not perfect glue joints. I'm building this cabinet, and I'm taking an angle grinder to it, and I have no clue if it's even going to work or not. So I could just be destroying all of this stuff, so here's what it is, but it's going to be fun.
Yeah, that messy glue up was all me. And you know that I like to name my passion projects, so this is where I need your help. Once you watch till the end and see how this thing turns out, give me your name. What should I name this project? I have some ideas, but I want to hear yours. And whoever can come up with the most creative name for this piece, I'm going to send you something cool. I'm not quite sure what it is yet, but it'll be cool. So just drop your name ideas into the comments. While you're at it, don't forget to like and subscribe. So after squaring the edges of each panel, this is where our sled's going to come into play. I needed that to get a perfect length on each one of these panels. And the sled performed just the way that I needed it to. Okay, so are you ready to see something stupid? Yeah, I'm trying to drum sand. Notice the smoke coming out of the back? That was not planned, of course. And the crazy thing is why am I trying to sand something that I'm about to take an angle grinder to? But this is a perfect example of why I use electronic hearing protection. I'll throw a link in the description, but I was able to hear the problem and stop it before it tore my machine up.
So this is like the strangest build ever. Just trying to see how everything fits together in case I need to like trim some edges off or just take it outside and burn it or whatever.
Okay, so I'm not gonna lie. While I was assembling my ugly box, there were times that I would doubt myself and doubt that this project could even work.
So now I need to figure out how I'm going to join this together. That way, whenever I go to grind this, I'm actually not grinding into what's holding this together. So the only thing that I can really think of is maybe dowels. If I do grind into those, it really doesn't matter. But I can't use traditional joinery. You know, right now this looks like just an ugly cube, but you have to kind of envision, you know, how the curves are going to go around the corners and things like that.
And here's just one of my many close calls that I had. And like I said earlier in the video, the only type of joinery that I could come up with would just be glue and dowels, wooden dowels, because I was going to be grinding this thing, grinding it down to some places 1/4 of an inch thick. I could not use anything that was metal that would actually go through the wood. I did install some corner brackets there that I removed later just to hold this thing together while I was getting everything into place.
And we're setting up a carving booth because it's 110 degrees outside. And this is just to keep the big chips, you know, things like that.
So now I needed to design how I wanted my ridges to go, kind of the shape of this box. And I'm old school, so I do this on graphing paper. And there's SpongeBob with lines all over him. So I'm going to chalk out where my drawer fronts are going to be. That way my ridges line up and I can actually use those ridges as my drawer pulls. And then I'll take my Picasso SpongeBob picture and just transfer that over to my workpiece. And what each one of these lines will represent will actually be like a ridge top, or at least that was my plan at this point. And I'm going to apologize now for the focus on some of this footage. I just grabbed a camera and started going.
So it is grind day. I've never done power grinding before, so this could be completely destroyed. So all the work that we've already put into it could be for nothing. But you never know until you try it. So I'm going to try it.
So as I mentioned, up until this point, I had never done power carving. So I didn't have power carving tools except for this one little saw blade. That's actually what it looked like, was a circular saw blade, just smaller, that said that it could be used for power carving. This thing was worse than a chainsaw at throwing dust and chips. And I mean throwing them. Like my arm was literally bleeding from the chips. And after throwing a big chip in my ear hole, I decided that I need to put my ear protection on. And the cool thing was I could jam to some music while I was doing all this tedious work. So here is another thing about this blade. When it catches, it digs in. That gouge was at least an inch deep, and it's actually one of the reasons why I had to change my design in the end. Again, this was my first time power carving, so I wasn't aware that you didn't have to end up with sawdust in any place that the human body can actually hold sawdust and shavings. I mean, I found sawdust between my toes. That's through work boots, through socks. How in the world does that even happen?
All right, so this is where I'm at. It looks like it's coming together. So now can you kind of see what the chalk marks were for? So this is just like a rough cutout. I'm just getting out a lot of the excess material. Then I'll have to come back in and sand and sand and sand. Hopefully I can come up with a couple of tricks to make that go a little quicker, but we'll find out. We're going to switch over to something that doesn't run out of battery.
Okay, so I switched over to a corded angle grinder. I was just going through batteries too quickly and they were getting too hot. But you can kind of see what I'm doing here. I'm taking that mark that I put on there with the chalk and I'm making this ridge top. And then from that point, I'm slowly working this angle down on both sides. Okay, so you remember how I had to change my plans? Well, this is it. Now I'm trying to undercut any of the ridges that will be on the bottom. The reason I had to do this is that I had so many gouges that I could not blend out.
Okay, so now for the tricky part, I've got to get these contours to match what is going to be my front plate. Wish me luck.
And you notice the death grip that I have on this angle grinder? It is to prevent this blade from catching and slicing straight through the cabinet.
So this is where I'm at. It's looking pretty rough. I went ahead and decided to order some different type of heads. The head that I've been using so far has been this just kind of like a saw cutter head type of thing. It's actually done decent as far as taking out material, but This is the kind of up close of what I have to work with. And the problem is, I mean, it looks like a beaver got a hold of it here. Once I start getting closer to my final depth, I'm afraid that this thing is going to just rip right through it. It has a bad habit of catching. So if you get this blade into a bind at any time, it kind of takes off and it puts a big gouge into the material. So as this gets thinner, I do not want that to happen because it'll cut a hole right in the middle of my dresser, you know, if it turns out to be a dresser. Let's see if I can get it to take a little more shape. It still looks like a big block to me. It's not what I'm picturing. So, oh yeah, the bits, I don't know why I keep saying bits, heads that I've picked up were some of these cut-all type of heads. I'm going to try those out and actually see if it provides, you know, a smoother finish, see how it compares to the other as far as taking out material. I went ahead and ordered like a medium grit, a heavy, you know, for taking out a lot of material, and we'll see. I think this one, you know, this on here is the medium, and then the one that I showed you originally, this one's just a coarse, very coarse shaping disc. So I'm hoping that since it's a shaping disc, it'll help me to actually get into these contours, get a little bit more definition. So we'll see. So since I still had a lot of material to remove, I started with the extreme, very coarse dish. I know I said disc earlier, but this is actually the dish. And the dish comes up on the sides, which is perfect for these contours. And even though I'm using this dish to hog out material, kind of like I did with that blade, it is leaving a much, much cleaner finish. I'm loving this thing. So far, these new cutter heads have been pretty good. A lot less marks, a lot more control. Still have a lot of material to take off. In the meantime, I have had eye surgery, so I'm going to have to change up how I'm doing a little bit because technically I'm not supposed to be around dust. Yeah. And dust is what I do. So I found a loophole. We'll see. If I go blind, it's your fault. So after just a little bit of time of messing with these dishes, I figured out how to control them. It's pressure. So you can either angle it down, put a little bit more pressure, and it'll take a little bit more out. And the absolute best thing is the ability to control this. I do not have to worry about this thing catching, kicking, tearing through my material. So at this point, I've switched over to the medium dish, and it is smoothing things out. I'm still trying to take out the marks that saw blade had left in. So what really surprised me about this dish is that I'm using Long Leaf Heartpine, which has a ton of resin in it, so it clogs up about anything that it touches. So I figured that it would do the same with this, and it didn't. So I looked into it, and the reason why is the coating that they put on the tungsten carbide teeth. It allows the material to slip off. In hindsight, I believe that I probably wasted at least a day of carving just because I didn't have the proper tools. Okay guys, so this is where we are at. Starting to get a little more definition the deeper that we get. Finally learning how to blend these edges over. Give it a little bit more of a flow there. So we'll see. My biggest fear is that I'm going to break through at some point. And I need to decide whether I want to put legs on this. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But it's coming along. Time to get back to grinding. Several days. And to anyone out there that's interested in power carving, definitely check out Cut-Saw Tools. Apparently they're a big name in power carving. I just didn't know it because this was my first project. But I'll throw some links into the description for all of the products that I used in this video. Now I'm just doing some final shaping here, trying to get my contours just right, just to cut down on the sanding. I have a little bit more grinding left to do. These discs have worked pretty awesome. And then I'm going to have to start sanding. It's going to be fun. I hate sanding. Gosh, I hate sanding. And look at all of this dust so far. So, sanding is a nightmare. I've tried die grinders, but the speed's so fast on the die grinder, I do not have a regulator. I guess I could throw one on there, but still it's going to eat through those little pads really quick. Just a orbital sander with a pad to try to help get through the contours. This is great for actually getting into the contours, things like that. I put them on both angle grinders, the cordless and the corded. They actually do really well on the kind of the flatter spots, but they go through sandpaper so fast just because of the RPMs of the sandpaper is so fast that it heats it up. And one of the things that will make you go through sandpaper is the heat. The faster the RPMs, the more heat, which is going to go through your paper a lot quicker. And then anytime the paper catches on any type of an edge or a corner, it just destroys it. Playing around with some different stains here. This is where I've played around with a black stain just to see what it would look like. I'm not even near that point yet. I mean, it's my nightmare. I hate sanding, but it's got to get done. So just trying to figure out the best way to do it without destroying this thing. But anyway, is what it is. Another day. That's what it's looking like right now. Started off as a big block. So we'll see. May turn out, may not. Regardless, I have learned a lot about power carving. Okay, so before I do any more sanding, and I've done a lot, and I still have a ton more to do, I'm going to see if I can slice my drawer fronts. I need to get everything spaced out and actually see if everything's going to work the way that I think that it's going to work in my head. Because if it doesn't and this drawer front falls apart, project's ruined and I don't want to spend hours more sanding. I'm going to take the facing off and then I can finish it out as far as the sanding and things like that. So we'll see. Wish me luck.
So this was the moment of truth. I could not mess up anywhere. No room for error. I mean, one little slip and the project's ruined. And luckily, this slab was on point. Everything worked out just as it should. Since this piece had to be carved all as one unit, I had to cut the drawer facings separate afterwards. That way all the contours would match up. Now that's going to leave an 1/8 of an inch gap in between each drawer. But I went ahead and decided to put an 1/8 of an inch gap on the ends as well. That way it would all be symmetrical. Now that I have my face plates, it's time for some drawer boxes. And here comes the boss, just to make sure that I'm working. And back to the drawer boxes. Using Craig's Foreman to knock these babies out, and then we can get into the slides. And there lies another problem. Typically, whenever you install drawer boxes and slides, you have a square front. I do not have a square front, so I had to improvise and use wedges. Drawer boxes in, slides working perfectly. Now I can go ahead and finish my sanding. This is the thickness of the material that I started with, a full 2-inch thick. And this is how thin I've brought it down. And this is what I call free child labor. Hey, don't judge me. So while Chan is learning a valuable lesson about sanding, I'm going to fine tune these front panels. And since I like cut saw's dishes so well, I decided to try out their burr tool as well. And it did not let me down. And now we just glue and wait.
Guys, another day of working on this thing. Waiting on some panels to dry on the drawers. The reason why we actually had to glue these on is because of the shape. Since there are a lot of really thin spots, I needed to get them actually attached to the drawer itself before I put the screws into the back. That way I didn't accidentally screw all the way through this thing. If one of these panels were to bust, or if I drop film or however, then the whole project's done.
And I'm just putting my final touches to my edges and contours with this burr tool before we get ready to stain.
This thing's a monster. So I have decided to finish sanding. There's a couple little divots in there where the grinder kind of got away from me that I just cannot get out without getting too thin. I have my drawer faces attached. As you can see there, all of those are attached, and I went ahead and put a stain conditioner on the whole thing just to try to help prevent some of the blotchiness, because I have decided to stain it black. So we'll see how that goes. And if it turns out horrible, then I'm probably gonna have to sand it all back off, and that would be horrible. Really, really bad. I think it turned out pretty cool as far as the way that the drawers are set up. The ridges actually are the handles, and I made sure to put one in every section for every drawer, so I will not have to have any type of hardware on here. I guess I'm too far into it to burn it, so we'll keep on going with it.
Okay, so check this out. I've actually had this around the shop for months. It's a stain pad by Makers, and never thought to use it. I've just always went back to my old rags and t-shirts, things like that for staining. So when I opened my drawer of stains, I saw this in there and decided to give it a try. And now I'm kicking myself for not using this for the last several months for any project that I needed to stain. It's like a sponge wrapped with microfiber, so it soaks up a lot of the stain and you do not have to redip it every 15 seconds. Not to mention that the finish was impeccable. Like I mentioned earlier, I'll link all of these tools in the description. And there it is. There is my challenge. I think that I kind of pulled it off. No, it is not perfect. It is not perfect by any means, but it's mine. Thank you guys so much for watching and joining me on this crazy journey. Until next time, I want you to go out there and find something that you've always wanted to do, something that intimidates you, and I want you to do it. See ya.